Hello guys, Jacob here, and I want to address some comments made by Alex O'Connor, who's best known as the Cosmic Skeptic, and Stephen, whose channel is named Rationality Rules. So, we know that morality is subjective. I agree with Alex that in an atheist worldview, morality is subjective. Now, he would say that morality would even be subjective in the perspective of a God existing, which I completely disagree with. But just for the sake of this video, I want to talk about how morality is subjective in an atheist worldview. So if you're one of these atheists who want to say, well, our evolution, our biology helps us to produce objective morality, then you fail to account for the fact that it is these very same processes that produce violence, that produce suffering. To say that evolution somehow justifies us seeking the well-being of everyone is to fail to understand that it is these very same processes that produce suffering, that causes suffering, that makes animals in the wild to attack one another. I mean, we are as products of evolution, if we assert that we are products of evolution, are in the process of preserving our own DNA. And if that requires us to harm others, to put ourselves before others, to take advantage of others, then people will do that. It happens everywhere, every day in the workplace. I mean, if the reason why these people have trouble understanding this is because they do not live in the real world. In the real world, we see suffering. It's the product of nature. It's the product of evolution. In fact, people need to die in order for our population to, remain controlled in some sense. So that's why you hear a lot of atheists say, well, there's overpopulation. And I'm not saying this is only atheists, some Christians say it too, but we have no reason to be against it because God is in control. Okay? We can say God's in control. So when I say it's in God's plan, I'm not saying that he has a specific, he's dictating our actions. I'm saying that he has an overall goal, despite everyone interacting with one another with their free will. So we can see that morality is subjective. We define our own purposes, we define our own goals, our own desires, but not entirely subjective, okay? Because if it was entirely subjective, then we'd have an infinite amount of desires, goals, and purposes to choose from, which we don't. We have a select few, and so we can reach some kind of common ground, at least to the point to where we can't outrightly just kill one another and take each other's goods like it was back in the day. So if you're one of these atheists who want to say that our morality is justified by our nature and by our evolution, then you have to also be honest and say that it is due to these very same processes that immorality exists. Evolution is the result of blind processes and random mutation. It's not an indicator of truth, nor does it need to be. We are not evolving necessarily to discern truth. We are simply evolving to survive. And concepts of truth are not needed to survive. In fact, some would argue that discovering things like the atomic bomb could lead to our own destruction. Evolution is a mindless process without any true meaning or goal or purpose. As minds, we can determine for ourselves what is our goal, desire, and purpose in life, especially knowing how finite it is. We've evolved beyond being mere chemical-induced robots to becoming philosophers, dealing with abstract concepts such as defining our purpose, goals, and desires. The problem comes when our goals, desires, and meanings conflict with one another's. This is an axiomatic fact, as Rationality Rules would put it. Our lives' meanings, goals, and desires often conflict with one another's. That's why we see violence in nature taking place all the time. It's part of nature. Can we be successful in our evolution function by harming and taking advantage of others? Yes. Genghis Khan one of the most brutal savages of history, was the most successful in evolutionary terms, since it's said that most Chinese are related to him, and he lived up to the ripe old age of 60 and died from a self-inflicted injury, which would have been considered very, very old for that time. Only the wise know how to do evil or harm to others without getting caught. And it's, in evolutionary terms, justified. In fact, some people would say that people need to die in order for the future generations to prosper. We need population control, is what many people would argue. We need euthanasia. We need abortions. We need to allow all of these things to occur in order for prosperity to remain intact. And this is where we run into the problem of the quality of life versus the quantity of life. So some people would argue the quality of life is more important than the quantity of it. So if you put quality over quantity, then let's say your population is overcrowded, your city is overcrowded of people, full of people, that it lowers the quality of life to the point to where the majority of people are suffering. They're living very poorly. And so you want to control the population. So how do you do that? Do you put the goals and purposes and meanings of some over others? Now, that's exactly what we mean by morality being subjective. And as many of you might know, many atheists would say that it is subjective. It's perfectly fine for it to be subjective, they'd say. But it really isn't. And Alex O'Connor knows why. So if you haven't seen his video, please do so. His video concerning morality. With God, the game changes, because philosophical theists do not assert that we can fully know objective morality simply because God exists. The existence of God would simply mean that there are objective moral truths. And this is where I believe Alex confuses moral ontology, which is the argument for moral truths existing, with moral epistemology, which describes how we come to know moral truths. The way we go about reaching moral truths, such as through adaptation and learning, is another question in and of itself. Now, God is the creator of everything, including space-time. So God would have created us with the innate capability to perceive his goodness as being the true good, since he created us that way. The only reason why anyone would reject God's goodness is because they're either ignorant of his standard of goodness and its consequences, or they simply use their free will to deny it, despite knowing what is truly good. And we do it all the time when we purposefully do that which we know is wrong. Now, Alex asks, why should we do good? Well, it's because God designed us to perceive maximal gratification from doing what is good, and God designed it to where, with absolute knowledge, we'd want to do what is good. For example, let's say that you have a child. You know your child will suffer later in life if they don't brush their teeth on a regular basis. And so you force them to brush their teeth on a regular basis. The child may perceive that having to brush his teeth is burdensome and a form of punishment. And if he had his own choice, he wouldn't brush his teeth. But you, being the adult, having the knowledge and experience to know better, that he'd be grateful that you had him brush his teeth regularly when he grows up. Not being able to discern what is morally good could simply be the result of being ignorant of what is morally good. The maximal good would be whatever would lead us to enter heaven. The maximally bad is doing whatever it is that would lead us to go to hell. Where I'd agree with rationality rules is that morality is ingrained in our very nature. Much like thermodynamics is ingrained in nature or any other law of physics. It's simply ingrained in our nature to be moral, to learn what the absolute forms of morals are. So then Alex says, well, does that make us robots? I mean, if God commands, simply God is commanding what is good and bad, does that make us simply robots? Well, what separates us from robots is our free will and the ability to come into the understanding of what is good through whatever methods God sets up for us. And we can reject these methods. We can reject what is good, as Alex asserts in his video. With a God existing, we can then assert that there are objective moral goals, purposes, and meanings to our life. We have a united purpose, goal, and meaning. Then we could say, well, well-being in this circumstance is what should be the goal. Or in this other circumstance, this is what should be the purpose or goal. We cannot assert that our society's moral standards are growing towards becoming better or worse unless there is an objective standard on which we can base these changes on. So we cannot determine for ourselves if our society standards are becoming better or worse unless there is a higher standard to base this judgment on. Many theists and myself have used the ontological and epistemological method to come to the conclusion that Christianity best meets the criteria of a God if a God were to exist. And so we stick to Christianity. Well, I'm hoping to hear your opinions and comments on this topic. And I want to know, do you agree with Alex, whether or not morality is subjective or objective? Or do you agree with Stephen, from Rationality Rules, that morality can be objective? So I'll read some of your comments and I'll get back to you. You have a blessed day.